Guys, we have the full chapter, and let's just say that Boruto's new Rasengan might be one of the most overpowered abilities we've ever seen in the Naruto universe. And I'm not kidding, it's absolutely broken. Not only that, we also have the possible return of a popular character due to a certain ability Boruto used later on in this chapter. But it doesn't even end there, because I've debunked Sasuke being dead due to something that was also revealed in the end portion of this chapter. But before we get to that point, of course, we're gonna start from the top. So as you know, chapter 2 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex left off with Boruto revealing a brand new Rasengan called Rasengan Uzuhiko, and that's pretty much where this new chapter picked up. So we first see that Code is observing Boruto using this new technique, and he repeats the name Rasengan Uzuhiko because it seems to be something new to Code as well. And we see that Boruto is walking towards Code in a very slow manner. So he then says to himself, is it the vanishing Rasengan? He's good at it. Then he says, no, it's something different. That's an invisible technique that can only attack from a distance, which of course is referring to the vanishing Rasengan. He then says that it's useless if it's not an ambush. It's strange for him to approach brazenly. Now, this is somewhat untrue because we've seen Boruto use the vanishing Rasengan in close quarter combat already. This happened in the battle versus Boruto when Boruto created the Rasengan and made it disappear immediately, so Boruto basically ran up into the ability. So it does have multiple uses, but of course Code wouldn't be aware of this because he wasn't there. So it does make sense that he would come to this logical conclusion. Now it appears that Code got impatient with Boruto walking towards him, so he decided to attack him instead. And it showed that he used his car mark to appear behind Boruto, but something very interesting happened. So before Code could land the attack on Boruto, Boruto was able to dodge him and then react and turn around to hit him with the Rasengan. Now this is very interesting in regards to power scaling because this basically proves that this version of Boruto is relative to this version of Code at the very least. Now what I would like to point out is that Boruto at this point in time is in his base form and so is Code. So this doesn't really confirm that Boruto is stronger than full power Code or vice versa, but it does show that in their base form they're at least relative. Well, at least for now, because this changes later on in this chapter. Now as I said before, Boruto was able to react to Code and basically turned around and tried to hit him with his Rasengan, but Code then reacted to Boruto as well and grabbed him by his arm. Now this part is very interesting because you see that Code tried to attack Boruto again, but Boruto was able to block him using his katana, and that's when Code decided to activate his karma seal. Then we see Code say, you seem to have a lot of confidence in that technique. Too bad, it's futile if it doesn't hit. And then Boruto said, I told ya, it's easy to kill you. In fact, it's already half done. And then we see that the Rasengan is basically spreading to Code's entire arm, so it looks like it's transferring to Code's body. And that's when Code says, what the hell is this, Boruto? Then Boruto replied saying, I'll say this one more time, Code. This is your last warning. Take me to where the Ten Tails is. If you can't, then die here. And that's when Code got angry again and he says, don't make me laugh, Boruto. Try it if you can. And then he tried to attack Boruto again, and that's when something very miraculous started to take place. Now it seems like Code isn't able to land a hit on Boruto, and it also seems like Code is basically phasing through Boruto's body. So Code decides to try attacking him again, and the same thing happened once more. Boruto basically didn't move, but yet Code wasn't able to land a hit. So this is very interesting. Code started to think to himself that, what is this movement? It's not on the level of dodging, it's not genjutsu or cloning. So what exactly is happening? And that's when we see Boruto immediately appear behind Code with the Rasengan still surrounding his body. And it appears that Code literally got speed blitzed by base Boruto because Boruto up until this point has yet to activate his karma seal and he still has one eye closed. So this is absolutely insane, bro. Like if Boruto is able to speed blitz Code while he's using his karma seal, this is absolutely insane because that Code should be greatly above Jigen. So at least we can comfortably say that this version of Boruto in his base form should already be above Jigen to a great extent. So imagine if Boruto then activates the karma seal and then the Jogan. Like he's absolutely busted and should easily be above Ishiki level. Now this is just me speculating, this hasn't been confirmed because it could be the case that Boruto did this using a hack's ability and not using pure speed, but based on what we're seeing here, it seems like he got speed blitz. And not only that, Boruto then landed a direct hit on Code, so it shows that Code legit could not react to Boruto. So it does confirm that Boruto is at least faster than unlimited Code while in his base form. Now what's really interesting here is what happens next. So after Boruto slammed Code using this Rasengan, we see that basically Boruto's entire body was covered in the wind energy surrounding him. And this is very interesting because it seems seems like Boruto is manipulating the natural energy around him instead of just using chakra. And this plays directly into the ability itself, which is explained later on. But you see that Code got slapped away, basically didn't fly too far because of course you know in Boruto the DC, which is destructive capacity, has been downscaled to make the fights look a bit more grounded. So Code did take a direct hit, but he didn't fly across the village or fly through multiple buildings, right? That didn't happen. But we can assume that the ability itself is extremely powerful. Now we then skipped over to Ada, who is actually watching the fight using her Senringan. And then she says, it's a simpler technique than I thought. How is it different from an ordinary Rasengan? And that's when Damon said, the shaking of the ground, is this it, Boruto? Nah, rather than the ground, it's the planet. This is the move using the planet's rotation. So what Damon is basically saying here is that the planet itself is shaking due to Boruto using this ability, which is absolutely insane. Now it could be that it's just the ground in the surrounding area, not the entire planet that's shaking. That could also be the case. So I just wanted to say that as a disclaimer because I'm sure someone was going to say it in the comment section, right? That could also be the case. Now moving on, we then see that Code is still standing after getting a direct hit from the Rasengan. That then prompted Boruto to say that I'm surprised that you can stand up from taking this. And that's when we shift over to Code's perspective, which seems kinda warped. Because from Code's perspective, it seems like the world itself has been warped. He can barely see Boruto clearly. And that's when Code says, what is this? Is this the rotation? And Code then falls to the ground, which seems like he's affected by the ability. Code then says, damn it, what did you do? And Boruto replied saying, savor it well. Think that this is a strike back from the planet you tried to destroy. And Code said, the planet you say? And that's when Boruto replied saying the chakra of the planet. A Rasengan that absorbed its rotation, that is Uzuhiko. The power coursing through your body will never disappear, just like a planet doesn't stop its rotation. And that the damage caused by the technique will last semi-permanently. And then he said that before the rotation of the planet stops, your life will end. And that's when you see that Code tried to stand up again, but then tumbles back down to the ground immediately. And that's when Boruto says, however, if I release Uzuhiko, it's a different story. Either you wait for death in silence or hand me over the 10 tails to survive. Think carefully about it and decide. And this is one of the most disrespectful moments for Code in the entire franchise. He just looks like a beaten down dog. It's just embarrassing, bro. Like we need to get rid of him. We need to get rid of Code, bro. We need him gone. And the funny thing about this entire situation is that it seems like Code was about to give up and basically agree to Boruto's terms, but then Kawaki swooped in and basically saved Code. Now he didn't try to save Code, obviously. He's just trying to attack Boruto because that's all Kawaki does these days, you know, attack Boruto. But of course, Boruto is able to dodge the attack, and that's when we see the entire squad pulling up. We see Inojin, Shikadai, Chocho, and even Himawari. And this is the first time in 3 chapters that we've seen Boruto without that angry look on his face, right? He looks kind of sad, you know, he says Hima. And Himawari acknowledges Boruto by calling him Boruto because of course Himawari is affected by omnipotence, so she does believe that Boruto is Kawaki and Kawaki is Boruto. So she is still brainwashed, but it seems like she is kinda on the fence about it based on what we saw in the prior chapters. So she is open to Boruto because she does believe that Naruto is still alive and that Boruto did what he did for a specific reason, and she wants to know why. And by the way, she is on the cover for this chapter, you know, even though she just has like one panel, one very small panel by the way, or I think 2. You know, she's standing behind Shikadai in this panel where Shikadai is basically saying, what were you doing in Konoha, Boruto? What are you talking about with Code? I'm like, bro, can't you see what he's doing is taking down Code? You know, obviously. Alright bro, what are you doing here? But then Boruto replied saying, we're in the middle of negotiations, can't you stop interfering with us? And that's when Code tried to use that opportunity to escape using his claw mark, but Kawaki's on it, so uses his dojutsu or Ishiki's dojutsu to shrink the claw mark so Code couldn't escape. And that's when Shikamaru called in asking Kawaki to report the situation, and Kawaki says, I don't know what happened, but Code seems to be quite exhausted. I just got rid of all of his surrounding claw grimes to cut off his retreat. We can probably kill him. And Shikamaru basically says, yo, this is a great opportunity that won't come again. Make sure to finish him off. But before Kawaki could do that, if he was even planning to, Boruto called him and said, get away from Code right now, don't provoke him. And that's when Kawaki replied to Boruto saying, who are you to order me around? Obviously if you came to Konoha, you must be prepared to die, right Boruto? And Code basically took that opportunity to attack Kawaki using one of his claw grimes through the claw mark on his own forehead. And Kawaki easily reacted to this claw grime using his morphing ability, but Code Code still took the opportunity to escape using the claw mark on the claw grime itself. And this part is very funny to me because if you guys watch the Flash TV show, they had this villain called Cicada, where every time they defeated him and had him dead to rights, like they just let him escape. Like they didn't do it deliberately, but something always came up, like a character basically said something, the character then turned away, and the Flash just wasn't paying attention, and Cicada just flew away, just for them to fight him again, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And that seems to be the case here with Code as well, because this has happened multiple times, and I think it's time to wrap it up, bro. Get rid of Code, get him out of the story, but I think that will happen based on what happens later on in this chapter, but we'll get to that soon. And that's when we skip over to Sarada, who is still inspecting the claw grime who turned into a tree after consuming a human. Now Sarada didn't discover anything new here. She basically said that the Ten Tails, by eating an Otsutsuki, transforms into the god tree, and its instinct might be to eat people, which is what Code said in the prior chapter. But what she did confirm in this chapter, which I think you could say something new, is that the person who was absorbed is still alive. So you had all these, people saying that the guy died or whatever, which is why Sarada didn't react, which I don't think was a good argument, but of course we have confirmation in this chapter that the person is still alive. Now that's it for Sarada. We skipped over to Boruto and Kawaki again, and Kawaki says, "Did you become Uchiha's adopted child?" which is referring to Sasuke, and then he says, "3 years, what's up with that look?" And Boruto replied saying, "I'm relieved that your sharp tongue hasn't changed. Himawari seems fine too." And Kawaki replied saying that, "What are you here for? If you choose your hometown as your place of death, I'll help you right here and now." Boruto then replied saying that dying in Konoha isn't bad, but not today. Back off, Kawaki, you're in the way. But Kawaki then replied saying that the only one who is in the way here and now is you, Boruto, right? Don't you think so? And that's when Boruto got some sort of transmission. And this is where we get into the interesting part, because that is when we see a toad pop up inside Boruto's clothing, which then said that it succeeded in sneaking in. Code went back to his base. And Boruto replied saying, "What about the Ten Tails?" Then it said, "Wait, not yet." And that is when we see Code in the original Ten Tails dimension, or at least it looks like the same place, but it could be somewhere different, who knows. But what comes next is actually quite tragic. Like, I think this is one of the most emotionally gut-wrenching panels I've ever seen in the entire Naruto franchise. Like, how could they kill Bug, bro? Like, it shows Bug absorbed by one of the claw grimes. So everyone who's watching this video, bro, just put a F in the comment section for Bug. Rest in peace. He was a good dude. He didn't last long, but he brought us joy for a very, very short time, and I respect him for it. But moving on, we still have some important things to discuss, like this Ten Tails being pinned to the ground in this desiccated form, which I think is the correct word, if I'm not wrong. I'm recalling the vampires from Vampire Diaries, where if you don't feed them blood or you drain them of their entire blood supply, they basically turn into skeletons until you feed them more blood, which I think is the case here for the Ten Tails. It seems like Code, in the process of creating over 1,000 claw grimes, basically nearly killed the Ten Tails or brought it down to a very weakened state. But that's when you see that Boruto attached a toad to Code's clothing, which is then relaying information to the other toad that's attached to Boruto. And it basically confirmed that the Ten Tails is indeed in this location. Now this is where we get into the Kashin Koji part of this video, because these toads seem to be very similar to the toads used by Kashin Koji. If you just go by the design of the toads themselves, they look very similar to the toads used by Kashin Koji. And what we know about them is that they're not real toads, because Ishiki was able to shrink them using his ability called Sukina Ikona, which we know isn't able to shrink organic matter. So it must mean that the toads used by Kashin Koji aren't real toads. Now this is relevant since people are going to use this to say that Boruto has Sage Mode because he was able to summon toads. Now for one, you don't need Sage Mode in order to summon toads, because Naruto was able to use toads even as a child, which we know he didn't have Sage Mode back then. And even Konohamaru is able to summon toads and he isn't a sage. So even if these toads are real toads and it's not the toads of Kashin Koji, it still doesn't mean that Boruto has mastery over Sage Mode, right? And he hasn't used it in this chapter. Now, it could be that he does, but this doesn't prove it. I will say that it isn't impossible to use nature energy without needing Sage Mode, right? We've seen that with multiple characters such as Jugo and even Hagoromo himself, who was able to use natural energy without entering Sage Mode. So it is possible that Boruto is able to manipulate natural energy, which I think adds to Boruto being able to use this Rasengan, because this Rasengan is basically Boruto using the natural natural energy around him to manipulate the planet's chakra as stated by Boruto. And as we know, the planet's chakra would be natural energy, which means that Boruto is manipulating natural energy. So it is possible that Boruto did go to Mount Miyaboku and trained with the toads in order to use this technique. But it's also possible that he trained with Kashin Koji instead, because as we know, Kashin Koji didn't train at Mount Miyaboku. His sage mode is artificial, similar to how the toads themselves aren't real toads. But even so, Kashin Koji is able to manipulate real natural energy, and he could teach that to Boruto, which would line up with Boruto using Kashin Koji's fake toads. Now, I could be wrong with that analysis and Boruto just has sage mode, Boruto trained with the toads and whatever. That could also be the case. Now, I did also say at the beginning of this video that I did debunk Sasuke being dead to some extent, and I do believe that, because the main theory is that Sasuke got absorbed by one of the Claw Grimes or the 10 Tails itself, which is why the Claw Grimes possess a Renegon. Now, I don't think that's the case, and I also don't believe that Sasuke is dead. I don't think they're gonna kill him off screen, but in regards to this specific theory, I don't think the Claw Grimes possess the Renegon because of Sasuke. I think it's because of the 10 Tails itself, because as we know, the 10 Tails possesses a Renegon, more specifically a Renish Sharingan. And as shown in this specific chapter, we see that the 10 Tails that's laying on the ground, which is basically the body of the 10 Tails itself, does have one of Code's claw mark covering the Renegon the 10 Tails naturally possesses. And as we saw back in chapter 74, chapter 73, Code was basically able to transfer one of his eyes to another Claw Grime by simply using the claw mark embedded into that specific Claw Grime. And I think the same thing happened with the 10 Tails. I do think since the 10 Tails has this claw mark over its eye, it's able to transfer its eye to another Claw Grime, which is exactly what happened. And I think it lines up perfectly, since when that 10 Tails received the Renegon, it started to talk as well and said Otsutsuki, right? None of the other Claw Grimes did this. So it seems like the 10 Tails has become conscious and it's able to transfer its consciousness to other Claw Grime. Now, there is one argument you could use against this analysis, which is that the 10 Tails that we know of possesses a Rena Sharingan, right? And we know for a fact that the Rena Sharingan possesses multiple Tomoes, but the Renegon we saw the Claw Grime use didn't possess any Tomoes, so it couldn't be a Rena Sharingan. So you could say that kinda dismantles the entire theory, but I do also believe that similar to how Sasuke loses the Tomoe in his Renegon when he loses enough power, I think the same thing could apply to the 10 Tails as well. And we see that 10 Tails is completely drained. It's literally like a shriveled up old version of itself, right? So it could be that the 10 Tails just doesn't have enough power to activate the Tomoes in the Renish Sharingan. Now, of course, we've never seen this happen with a Renish Sharingan user before, but I will say that we've never seen a Renish Sharingan user be this low on power as with the 10 Tails in this situation. So I think it could apply if you want it to apply, but of course it's just my theory and you could disregard it and just believe that Sasuke is a Claw Grime, whatever, you know? Now that's basically it for the chapter. We see that Boruto used the hand sign, which means that he's probably going to teleport to that location, maybe, or maybe he's going to fight Kawaki. We have no idea, but I do hope we kind of move the plot forward because it has been 3 months, so I hope something very interesting happens in the upcoming chapter. But I do believe that Code will be absorbed by the 10 Tails and he will create a brand new entity, and that is because I believe that Code's karma still consists of Ishiki's DNA, and that will of course cause the 10 Tails to evolve. Of course, I've done an entire video on the topic itself where I go in depth on why I think that's going to happen and how I think it's going to happen. So if you want to learn more, the video will be linked at the end of this video, so you guys can just watch that video after this one and let me know your thoughts in the comment section on that video. But let me know your thoughts on this video itself, on this chapter. Do you think it was a good one? Do you think it was a bad chapter? Do you think it was slow? Do you think it was fast? Like, what do you think about the chapter in general? And also drop your predictions for the upcoming chapter. With that being said, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.